Sport fishing has always been a popular activity in the Northwoods, one enjoyed by local residents and people who visit the region for fishing opportunities. This presentation will describe some of the history of this pastime and the role played by some people of Langlade County. In the early 1920s, when Frank Suick was a young man, himself in his early 20s, he had two major interests. One was hanging out in the family-owned tavern at 908 Fifth Avenue. It stood opposite the railroad depot, where he would exchange stories with the many Chicago Northwestern workers who gathered there. Antigo was a major rail hub for the Chicago Northwestern, and for many employees, the tavern was a favorite hangout. Frank Suick's second major interest was fishing. He sometimes would combine the two interests by hitching a ride on a rail run from Antigo to a choice location, Pelican Lake, for a day of fishing. When evenings rolled around, he hitched a train ride back to Antigo. On one such fishing trip, he observed that an injured trout that he had hooked and was reeling in was attacked by a musky predator. It inspired Frank to whittle a lure made of balsam to imitate an injured trout. The lure was so successful that he soon became a local legend, and his trophy fish were displayed in the family tavern. Frank was recognized as the man who caught 30 muskies in 30 days. He continued to tinker with this lure, and in 1942 began offering it for sale. With the offering of the Suick Muskie Thriller to the public, a small local industry was born. Today, 4 generations of Suicks have continued and grown the family business of manufacturing this world-famous lure. Here is the Pelican Lake Association promoting Pelican Lake as a fishing destination reachable by the Chicago Northwestern. Here is Suick's Bar, the home of the Muskie Thriller, with prize-winning fish on display. Frank Suick was not the first one to rely on the railroad to get him to a favorite fishing spot. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, a network of rail lines provided lumber companies access to timber resources. In an era when the roads were poor or non-existent, the railroad also generated the means for sportsmen to reach the lakes of the Northwoods. Access to isolated areas quickly generated lodges accommodating sportsmen. Resorts popped up as early as the 1880s on the shores of Lac Vieux Desert. Other resorts soon followed, including those run by Seth Conover and O.W. Sainer, who now have towns named after them. The Chicago Northwestern Railroad realized an opportunity. From 1917 to 1950, they ran fishermen specials from Chicago through Antigo to northern Wisconsin and on to the Michigan Upper Peninsula, where they operated resorts. In the early and late summer, these trains ran only on weekends, but from Memorial Day to Labor Day, they operated daily, except Mondays. Trains brought fishermen north and then took them home with a special refrigerated section in baggage for trophy fish. Tourist promotion catered to all levels of fishing interests. So ads promoted Chicago Northwestern excursions to the Northwoods for summer outings. Resorts catered to fishermen and advertised the availability of a good day's catch. There were rustic cabins rented out in the Northwoods, and many had dining halls associated with them, and some were more upscale lodges. There were fishing opportunities for adults looking for the big one, and for children just out for a day's fun. Frank Suick's musky thriller, once it was marketed, became a top seller, but it was not the only choice of lures for those seeking a big catch. It was yet another man from Antigo who marketed another popular lure, one aimed at landing trout. In the 1940s, Todd Sheldon was operating a small sporting goods store in downtown Antigo at 643 Superior Street. This is the general area today where Todd Sheldon had his Sheldon's Sporting Goods shop. His friend Frank Velek discovered a fishing lure while he was a GI stationed in France at the end of World War II. He had considerable success with this lure he found. Frenchman André Moulinard had invented a spinning fishing lure and patented it in 1938. Here's Moulard and the patent and the lure from his patent application. MEPS is a French acronym for Manufacturier d'engins de précision pour pêche sportive, translated as Manufacturer of Precision Equipment for Sports Fishing, or MEPS. Velek, the GI, brought some of MEPS lures back to Antigo and showed them to his friend Todd Sheldon. Sheldon put them in his tackle box and forgot about them. 2 years later, having poor luck fishing on his preferred location, the Wolf River, he got desperate and gave one of those MEPS lures a try. Within 2 hours, he had 4 trout weighing more than 12 pounds total. Sheldon was hooked on these lures and wanted more. He worked through Frank Velek to obtain more to sell in his Antigo shop. Velek had an arrangement with a woman in France who sent him MEPS spinners in exchange for nylons. It wasn't long before Antigo's demand for MEPS lures exceeded her need for nylons, so Todd began buying lures directly from Moulinard's factory. Sales numbers continued to grow, and in 1956, Todd Sheldon sold his store in downtown Antigo and formed Sheldon's Incorporated and focused exclusively on sporting and manufacturing MEPS lures. He acquired exclusive U.S. rights to sell the MEPS spinner. And in 1973, he bought out the French company. Sheldon's, which had started in a 10-foot square room in the back of a small sports shop in downtown Antigo, had become known worldwide as a distributor of fishing tackle. Todd Sheldon, always a tinkerer, made one major improvement on the original MEPS lure. Passing through Antigo, drivers may be puzzled by a sign proclaiming "Squirrel Tails Wanted." Squirrel tail hair has unique properties ideal for lures. This discovery was due to a chance encounter. As he often did, Todd Sheldon was trout fishing on the nearby Wolf River in the 1960s. He was having pretty good luck with his MEPS lures, but he noticed that a young boy was reeling in even larger trout. Todd's competitive nature and curiosity led him to investigate. The boy was also using MEPS lures, but he had made a slight modification. He had attached a small tuft of squirrel tail to the hook. Todd returned to the shop and began to tinker. He tried dressing his hooks with hair from bear, fox, coyote, badger, skunk, and deer, but only squirrel tails or bucktail hair resulted in an improved lure. And so, with the modification inspired by a boy and a chance encounter, began the demand for the public for squirrel tails and the roadside sign at MEPS. Squirrel tails were dyed in various colors and attached to the lure. Here's a scene of fishing on the Wolf River near within the Menominee Reservation, one of Todd Sheldon's favorite fishing spots, and where he found the boy who had improved on his lure. And here is the classic Mepps lure as modified by Todd Sheldon by adding a tuft of squirrel tail. Today, a third generation of the Sheldon family continues to run the family business, manufacturing lures that have won worldwide acclaim. Sheldon's Incorporated now owns Mepps SA in France and the Mr. Twister, a soft plastics lure company located in Louisiana. The Mepps Anglia, the original French spinner, is still manufactured in France and accounts for the bulk of Sheldon's sales. Lures sold in the U.S. are assembled, packaged, and distributed in Antigo. For a number of years, Sports Afield and Field and Stream magazines collaborated on an annual contest to identify the most productive lure available. From 1973 until 1985, when the contest ended, Mepps Lures was the winner each year, except 1978 when they were in second place. These accolades were featured in their advertising. Mepps is still a major business. They publish an annual catalog describing their latest designs. And the Suick catalog is also still a major manufacturer of lures in Antigo. Frank Suick and Todd Sheldon both created well-established products with wide appeal to sports fishing nationwide. The businesses they established continued to be run by subsequent generations of family members. 3 other Antigo residents have turned their interest into fishing into cottage industries during their own retirements. Joseph Doledge was born in Vienna, Austria in 1889. He came to the U.S. with his parents when he was 2. The family settled in Chicago, and Joseph would go to work for the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. He began working in 1916 and was transferred to Antigo in 1922. When he retired in 1954, Doledge moved to Pelican Lake, where he could pursue his fishing hobby. Like Frank Suick and Todd Sheldon, Joseph Doledge tinkered with his fishing gear and received a number of patents, particularly for his floats, which he packaged and sold locally. So Joseph Doledge's floats were sold in stores in Antigo. Harry Gusick was born in 1910 and went on to study civil engineering. After working as a civilian administrator for the CCCs in the 1930s, he served during World War II in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a millwright and mechanic in Antigo, and then at the Antigo Air Force Radar Base. Upon retirement in 1972, he settled in Antigo and devoted himself to spending more time fishing. He achieved some renown for inventing his Bonanza musky lure. The inspiration for the Bonanza came when Gusick began experimenting with a clothespin and a rubber flipper on the Mississippi River years earlier. In the 1930s, he got the idea from a fellow fisherman in La Crosse to try this. Gusick had always tinkered with lures for his own use. Marketing his invention only occurred to him much later in retirement. His lures would eventually be sold in Marshall Field's in Chicago, Abercrombie & Fitch in New York, and by L.L. Bean. He continued to make his Bonanza lures in the basement of his home at 628 Elm Street in Antigo until his death in 1990. Rounding out the collection of Antigo residents who marketed fishing gear, is Alva Earl Sims. Born in 1882 in Brown County, he settled in Antigo when he was 20 after earning a living by traveling from one logging camp to another, selling tailor-made suits to lumberjacks. In 1924, he decided to settle in Antigo and began operating a grocery store, which he ran until 1934. Both before and after his grocery store stint, he worked at various clothing stores. During these years in the grocery and clothing business, he produced fly fishing lures out of his home, which he sold in his grocery and through other locations. By winning many contests and bait casting competitions, he was able to promote sales of his lures. These three fishermen, while not as prominent as Frank Suick and Todd Sheldon, are yet another Antigo contribution to the sports fishing industry. Those eager to get away from the shoreline to fish found another Antigo business to cater to their needs: the Antigo Boat Company, a manufacturer of wooden boats. They produced fishing boats in Antigo from 1945 to 1948, before moving operations to Elko, where they became known as Lakecraft and later Wavemaster. By the 1960s, aluminum boats replaced these classic wooden craft, but a few of them are still around. Opportunities to land the big one have long brought people to the Northwoods, including the rich and famous. President Calvin Coolidge set up his summer White House in the Northwoods in 1928 so that he could trout fish on the Brule River. He stayed at the Cedar Lake Lodge, owned by his friend Henry Clay Pierce. Future President Herbert Hoover visited him there. They fished in separate canoes. Hoover was indifferent about Coolidge, but he enjoyed the area and did return to fish Wisconsin's waters at a later date. After the end of World War II, future President Dwight D. Eisenhower tried his luck angling near Minocqua. He was so well liked that the Lac du Flambeau Ojibwe made him an honorary chief when he returned after he left the presidency. Baseball legend Ted Williams and CBS broadcast star Edward R. Murrow also fished northern Wisconsin waters. Many Ojibwe inhabited the area long before white settlers. They quickly adapted to the influx of tourists, seeing an opportunity to earn money as fishing guides. In the years between the World Wars, nearly every male Ojibwe at Lac du Flambeau spent some time as a paid guide. A typical outing would begin at 8 a.m. and involved preparing bait and gear, rowing and/or motoring to a site, and cleaning the day's catch. The going rate was $5 a day. Important to each day trip was the shore lunch, where the guide would prepare a meal of the fresh morning catch, fried in lard, fried potatoes with bacon, and boiled coffee. Louis Saint-Geran, a Lac du Flambeau Ojibwe, acted as a fishing guide for Ted Williams, burlesque entertainer Gypsy Rose Lee, and many other visitors to the Northwoods. He was generally recognized in the region for his knowledge and skills. His years of guiding have earned him recognition in the Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame and Museum in Hayward. For some, fishing is a relaxing activity, either with family and friends or in solitude. But for others, it is a business. Many visitors and residents of Wisconsin's Northwoods arguably anticipate the start of fishing season with an eagerness surpassed only by the start of gun deer season and Christmas. Small business owners profit from those hoping to land a trout or a muskie, walleye, or bass. In addition to guides for hire and stores selling supplies, many family-owned rental cottages are available. Each year, nearly 2 million people fish in Wisconsin's waterways. They catch about 72 million fish of various species. Sports fishing has significant impact on the economy of Wisconsinites. A 2020 report by the American Sports Fishing Association states that 1.9 million sports fishers spent $1.5 billion in Wisconsin, $2.3 billion including fishing-related expenditures such as hotels and restaurants. It provided about 13,500 jobs. In another 2020 analysis, Wisconsin was rated as second best state for fishing based on several criteria. Louisiana was first, Minnesota was third. The state has long recognized the importance of fishing to the local economy and made efforts to maintain good fishing stock. For example, lakes and rivers of north central Wisconsin were stocked with fish raised as fingerlings near Madison and transported in grand style in specifically designed railroad cars to be unloaded in northern waters. The University of Wisconsin, pioneers in limnology studies, maintains a research station and hatchery at Trout Lake near Woodruff. The sport has created its own unique attraction, the Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame and Museum in Hayward. In 1976, its main display building opened a one-half block long and 4.5-story tall building in the shape of a leaping muskie. Over 50,000 visitors tour the museum annually. Antigo is well represented in its Hall of Fame. 2 Antigo residents described earlier have been inducted into the museum's Hall of Fame. Todd Sheldon of MEPS and Frank Suick of the Suick Muskie Thriller. They illustrate Antigo's important contribution to a popular and money-making activity. So whatever your level of fishing skills or interest, Antigo has played a role in helping you pursue your hobby.